Hey guys, welcome back to Primer Podcast. My name is Jessica Flake. I'm part of the spiritual formation team here at St. Mark's. And we have a special guest with us today. And this is Suanne Camfield. She is part of our Storytellers group, and just um, excited to have her with us, and just welcome. And we're so excited that you're going to be with us this week. And so we are our storytellers have been kind of asked to just dive into stories of impact in the Bible. So what has been something that you have felt like God has led you to this week as you've been preparing?
Well, okay, first of all, I have to say thank you for having me. I didn't know if you were pausing or waiting for me to say hello or not,
It
so
is
I'm so sorry.
okay.
That was a
No,
little
no.
awkward moment. I'm so sorry. And I just want to say thanks for inviting me. Thanks to Pete for inviting me, and just so excited to be part of what you guys do at St. Mark's. And so I can't wait for that. And so it's great to just be here with you. And so then you asked me a question. You just asked, tell me what you asked me again.
So like with the stories of impact. So I know Pete has asked all of you guys that are coming in to share just a story of impact through the Bible, and really you guys had the chance to kind of work out what you wanted to do. There was not anything I don't think you had any guidelines. You got to pick which story. So it's been exciting to see our storytellers and see where God's led them. Each week's a little different, and so excited to see. So basically, where has God led you this week as you've prepared this? And
Yeah.
is it something that you immediately was like, okay, I know what I'm going to talk about, or did it come last minute?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So I'm part of our preaching team at my local church, and so I always have things churning through my head. And anytime you preach, anytime you teach people, like God does, He brings all kinds of things to mind. And oftentimes we learn more as teachers and preachers and leaders when you're heavy in content. Anyone who leads a small group or leads other people's know that oftentimes the most formation happens in us as we try to lead others. And so I was preparing for a sermon I did here at my church, and I just feel like God keeps bringing this idea of story and storytellers. I'm cheating a little bit because I didn't pick one story from the Bible, but instead rather kind of backed up and said, okay, so there are all of these stories I could pick. I love to teach, and we could pick a lot of different things, but really, if we don't know how to center our story within the larger center or the larger story of scripture, I don't know if all the other stories we always get the fullness out of them. We need to remember and be able to orient ourselves with this story that God has written from Genesis to Revelation to say, okay, how does this impact my story? And what is that story? What is God's story? What does it mean for me? What does it mean for how I live out my faith? And so for me, as I sit with that question, there's two questions that I continue to come back to all the time. And this has been part of my faith journey for a long time. When I find myself just kind of getting uncentered or going through times of doubt or fear or loss or grief or uncertainty, I have to come back to two things. And those two questions for me are, do I believe that God is who he says he is? And do I believe that I am who he says I am? And it's funny, when I was preparing for this, I was like, wow, those are the most simple questions, foundational questions. But
Yeah,
yet, of
so
all the things in
impactful.
my faith,
Yeah.
well, of all the things in my faith journey, those are the two things when it feels like, we live in a world where we get so many messages thrown at us about who we are, about who God is. And when I feel, like I'm just being blown around a little bit, I come back to those two things. Okay.
Mhm.
Do I believe actually that God is who he says he is? And then do I believe as a result of that, that I am who he says I am? And when we can answer those two questions, I feel like it changes our story and how we live them out. So, like I said, I cheated a little bit on stories of biblical impact. I'm just using the whole story, but that's kind of how I wanted to come at it.
Yeah. So what are, I know you said that there was multiple stories of the Bible that you took from. What is one that you kind of honed in on a little bit more than the others?
Well, I think from this Ephesians chapter 2, the story of who we were before Christ and who we are after Christ. Before we found Christ, the scripture is really clear that we really were without hope, right? We were dead in our transgressions and sins, that we gave ourselves over to all kinds of messages, if you will, in this world about who we are, about what we're called to do, or how we're supposed to live. Before we knew Christ, that part of our story is like, we were dead. We were without hope. And because of that, we gratified the sinful nature of our flesh. And so that's a part of our story that I feel like is not always, we don't always want to hear that. That doesn't
Right.
feel good, right?
Yeah.
But if we don't have an understanding of that part of the story, then we can't move on to the good news in the next part of the story about God, who is rich in mercy, right? He covered us, and by grace we are saved, that it's not from ourselves, that grace is a gift from God. And then because of that, God, he seats us in the heavenly realms with Christ as part of our identity. And he created us to do good works and all of those things that then we are called to do as we live into our stories. We can't do that unless we understand the bad part of our story and then the good news. Again, super simple, super basic. But I think sometimes when I think about so many people who even show up in church each and every week, like, do we actually understand that story? Is it part of who we are? Do we skip over that? And so I feel like Ephesians 2, Ephesians 2 verses 1 through 10, it's just this like mini cosm of the gospel that just reminds us of what our story is rooted in.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I cheated a little bit too because I asked Sue Ann to let me know what Bible verses you were really honing in on. And so like I love Ephesians 2, 4 and 5, as this says, but because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace that you have been saved. And like you mentioned it before, is that I do think that sometimes um we'll read it, but I think sometimes we read it so quickly it doesn't settle in. And we think about how grace has overcome all of our sin natures, and but we were dead in our sin, and so the feeling of what that truly means, and knowing that we are children of God, and making sure that our identity is in God, and not you mentioned this before in our messaging, is that making sure that with so many places in society now that tries to tell us what our identity is, to always make sure that we remember that our identity is with Christ, and to believe what he says, we're loved and cherished, and that he knows every hair on our head. And so knowing that that is how he sees us, and remembering that when we are um, going through seasons that maybe we don't feel that way about ourselves. And can you kind of elaborate a little bit about where you have felt, or if maybe you've talked to some people, whatever type of examples in your season of ministry, where you have seen those identity crises, where somebody has forgotten who they were in Christ, and kind of elaborate where you feel like um, that's led you in your ministry area.
Yeah, well, I'd say, the best story is always our own in terms of, again, how we're transformed, how we're changed. This message doesn't come out of just an intellectual place for me. It comes out of a personal experience because I went through a season in my own journey where I had done something. I had injured someone that I loved very much in a way that I just never thought I would. I mean, as a follower of Christ, I thought, I know better. I know how to treat people. I know what's expected of me. I know the promises I've made to the people I love, and I hurt a group of people very much, and it just wrecked me. I mean, I was forgiven. They told me they forgave me. We walked through it together, but I just could not get over the fact that I had done something that I didn't think I would ever do. And my identity was wrecked, and I had to understand really beyond lip service that the grace of God was actually big enough to cover all my sin and to cover all of my shame and to cover all my past, present, and future. And I think it's one thing for us as we journey through our stories to say, oh, yeah, I know that's what the Bible says is true. I get it. And it's one thing to look at other people and say, I know that's what's true of you. Yes,
Right.
Jessica, I believe you are covered by the grace of God. But me, when we really encounter our sin in a new way, when we really see our own brokenness, and for me, I was in my 30s, it was really the first time I encountered my own brokenness in a significant way and my need for a savior, even though I'd been a Christian for, more than a decade. And to say, wow, God's grace is not only is it for me, but it's big enough for me. And so I had to keep coming back to those two questions because I would sit in church and I'd sit through a worship service and my husband is a pastor. And so I felt like it was before I was on staff at a church and I'm in the process of it being a pastor. But, I just felt like I had kids who went to church every week and we had to show up and I didn't want to show up because I didn't feel like I deserved to be there. And I would sit in worship services and it was just a hard time for me. And what I had to do was keep coming back to those questions. Okay, God, and here's the kicker, right? We can't say yes to the first question. God, do I really believe that you are who you say you are? I think that's sometimes easier for us. We say, okay, yeah, God, I believe that. But then, do I believe that I am who you say I am? Well, guess what? We can't say yes to the first question and then say no to the second. The
Right.
two have to go hand in hand. And so I think like I said, a period of just deep grief and, pain in my own life, I just had to again and again come back to that and say, okay, God, if I actually believe that I am who you say I am, then I have to believe your grace is big enough. I have to believe that I am forgiven. I have to believe that I am made new. And I have to believe that I am still worthy of your love.
Yeah.
And that was a game changer because it took me years. It wasn't just like one day I woke up. It took me years to finally go, okay, I believe that this is true of me.
Mm.
And it didn't mean that it was any less true of me when I didn't believe it. It was always true.
Right.
But to be able to step into that piece of your own story and claim that for yourself in new ways. And, I don't think that always just happens once. Maybe that happens multiple times in our journey. I have to keep coming back to those questions over and over again to center myself and remind myself like, no, okay, this is the story that's actually true of me. And it's the story that is going to inform how I walk through the rest of my life.
Yeah. So, what are some things that you did that made you, because it sounds like it was a journey. It was not an overnight, going from questioning God and questioning your identity to, okay, I believe. So it was a journey that you went on. So what were some things that you did during this journey?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a great question. I mean, I think I always came back to, again, scripture, being
Mhm.
rooted in the word, just being reminded of God's promises over and over and over. I think continuing to show up for corporate worship, I think so often when we're in those seasons, we want to isolate because it's easier. It's
Yeah.
easier for us to pull away from people who love us. And I had to just keep putting myself in places, both in a corporate kind of communal space as well as with just close relationships and friends and letting them just shed grace on me in ways that I didn't wasn't always comfortable receiving, but they just kept loving on me in such beautiful ways.
Yeah.
And I think when we experience that kind of grace from others, I mean, it radically changes us. And so there was no magic pill. I just kept showing up and letting people speak truth to me and letting people point me to the truth. And at some point going, okay, there's either a point in my story where I'm gonna keep holding on to what is not true because of whatever's messed up inside of me, or I'm gonna actually believe what is true. And again, that happens in community, it happens with the word, it happens with all kinds of different things. It happens with encounters with God where you just have those moments where, he whispers his love over us in those
Yeah.
intimate moments and like, okay, I'm just gonna keep walking in this way until I start to heal. And eventually that happened.
Yeah. So I've, while you've been sharing, I'm thinking man, our stories are very similar because 10 years ago of my life seems very similar, and I kind of walked away from faith a little bit, and in that with that journey, I walked away from my marriage, and so we were separated for a period of time.
Mm,
When we got back together, we were like, okay, what do we do? And we were believers. This is where I say, like I've always said, we were believers, but we weren't followers. And so we found St. Mark's and just pouring ourselves into um, finding this relationship with Christ and surrounding ourselves with those that will tell us, this is who God says you are. This is the way to have this relationship. It's I feel like I have separated myself from Christ, but Christ has been there the entire time. And so realizing like I had such great inspiration that was right there for my first steps of building this relationship with Christ. And if I did not have those people around me, I don't know that I would be here. So
mm,
I'm so grateful for those that came that God put in my life, and I think that's the realization is that God placed people in our lives during that time, and then once we got through that crisis, we found um, the understanding of that daily renewal of relationship with Christ. It's not, only in crisis do you go to God. You are daily going to God and finding what best ways that you connect to God. And because I've talked about this with so many others, is that, and even on the podcast we've talked about this, is how I connect to God's probably totally different than the way that you connect to God. And going through that has helped me understand who God is, and then realizing all these things I thought about myself and you know told myself were were not true in the way that God sees me. And I'm his daughter, I'm beloved. And so until I realized who God was, and how close he was to me, it never connected, and I never understood how much he loved me. And then once
mm,
you realize that, it's it's pretty easy to realize I am who he says I am. Once you
mhm.
realize how much he's loving us. But yeah, so I I can definitely relate to all of that you
Yeah.
just talked about. So
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that part of your story too. And I think what you said is just so important. You know, you keep showing up, you keep people letting people love you. And it's not just, in crisis we do that, but it's an ongoing journey. There are other parts of our story that come that aren't crisis, and we have to some of the same practices that we learn when we are in crisis, we use those practices and those habits just when we're just getting knocked around a little bit. And
right,
so I think that's so true. And I think the other thing that you said about believing who God says he is and what is true of us, one of my favorite parts of the Ephesians passage is that while we were dead in our transgressions and sins, I mean, it's Romans 5:8, right? While you were yet still sinners, Christ died for you. And I think that's one of the most miraculous and beautiful and profound things in all of scripture, that while we were dead, while we were far away from God, while we were, lost in our own sin, that's when Christ died for us. He doesn't wait for us to get our act together. He didn't wait for us to get to a certain point in our journey and then say, "Okay, now my sacrifice is complete for you." He
right,
did it while we were dead. I mean, when we can get our minds wrapped around that, that abundant, amazing grace is just like, wow, okay, if that is actually what is true of God, then how do I not receive that gift of grace that he sacrificed everything for me?
right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for sharing and coming with us this week. And guys, We hope that you are going to take a deep dive in your individual study or your group study and dig deep into that Ephesians 2 and that 1 through 10 is, I've studied that this week quite a bit once Suanne sent that to me. So we hope you have a great rest of your week. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.